The highway stretched endlessly before him, an asphalt ribbon slicing through the vast, empty countryside. Jake had been driving for nearly 5 hours, and exhaustion was beginning to gnaw at his senses. The dull glow of the dashboard lights flickered softly, the only source of illumination in the oppressive darkness that surrounded him. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his tired eyes. The clock on the dashboard read 2:47 a.m. Too late to be on the road, but he just wanted to get home. The monotony of the drive was unbearable. Miles and miles of nothingness, interrupted only by the occasional flickering streetlight or the distant silhouette of skeletal trees. The silence was unnerving. The radio had given out an hour ago, leaving nothing but the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic thud of the tires against the pavement. He was alone on the road. At least, that's what he thought. Then it happened. A shadow flickered in the rearview mirror. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, just his mind playing games with him. But then, the shadow moved. Jake's heart clenched. He sucked in a sharp breath, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. Slowly, cautiously, he glanced up at the mirror again. Nothing. The back seat was empty. He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "You're just tired, man. Just tired." Still, a sense of unease coiled in his stomach. He adjusted his posture, forcing his focus back on the road. The last thing he needed was to fall asleep at the wheel. A few minutes passed. Then he felt it. A presence. It was subtle at first, just a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, like the weight of unseen eyes watching him. He tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger. The air inside the car felt heavier, colder. His hands were clammy on the wheel. He stole another glance at the rearview mirror and froze. There was something sitting in the back seat, a shape, dark, indistinct, motionless. His chest tightened as his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. He spun around, his breath hitching. But there was nothing there. He let out a shaky exhale, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His pulse hammered against his temples. Just your imagination. Just your imagination. He turned back to the road. Then the whisper came. Software. Hoarse, right behind his ear. "Don't look in the mirror." Jake's body went rigid. His breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. The words had been unmistakable. Real. His grip on the wheel trembled. He wanted to turn around, to confront whatever was there, but fear pinned him in place. Then something moved in the back seat. The sound was barely audible, a soft rustling like fabric shifting. Jake's blood turned to ice. He couldn't do this. His foot pressed down on the gas. The car lurched forward, the speedometer climbing. He didn't care. He just needed to get the hell out of there. But then, a cold breath brushed against his neck. Jake's stomach twisted into knots. His hands shook violently. He bit down on his lip, trying to suppress the primal terror clawing at his insides. Then, the voice spoke again. "You shouldn't have looked." A sharp, icy pain spread through his shoulder, like fingers digging into his flesh. Jake lost it. He screamed, jerking the wheel. The car veered sharply off the road, tires skidding against gravel. For a split second, everything was chaos. Blinding headlights, the screech of metal, the violent lurch of his body as the car flipped. Once, twice, before crashing into the ditch. Then, silence. When Jake opened his eyes, everything was dark. A ringing filled his ears. His body ached. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, warm against his clammy skin. The car was wrecked, resting on its side. The windshield was shattered, glass shards scattered across the dashboard. Jake groaned, shifting painfully. His fingers fumbled for his seatbelt, unclicking it with effort. He collapsed onto the crumpled passenger seat. Then, something moved behind him. His breath caught in his throat, the soft creak of leather. A slow inhale. Jake didn't dare move. His entire body was screaming at him to run, but he was frozen in place. And then, a hand wrapped around his ankle, cold, skeletal. Jake screamed. He thrashed, kicking violently. The grip tightened, nails digging into his skin. He scrambled, clawing at the door handle. His fingers slipped on blood. The hand pulled harder. Desperate, he kicked again, this time connecting. The grip released. He didn't wait. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he lunged for the door, shoving it open. He tumbled out, gasping for air, his limbs shaking. He was free. Panting, he turned back to the car and froze. Something was looking at him through the shattered window. A face, pale, hollow, smiling. Its eyes, empty voids, locked onto his. Then it spoke one last time. "You looked, Jake." The world went black. They found him hours later, unconscious in the field beside the wreckage. The officers noted deep scratches along his ankle and shoulder, as if something had tried to pull him back inside. Jake survived, but he never spoke of that night again. And from that moment on, he refused to drive alone. Because sometimes, the road isn't empty, and sometimes, you're not alone in the car.